So if there is one word to describe the times, it is uncertainty. Uncertainty is what is creating a lot of anxiety that people are feeling towards the financial crisis that we feel, the health crisis that we're experiencing, and the social crisis in our lives right now. Uncertainty to what will come next. But why? Why so much uncertainty? It's because nothing like this has ever happened before. There is no playbook written that we can go reference and pull out for when this situation occurs. So we're trying to learn right now and understand how to respond in a time of great uncertainty. One thing I'd like to say is there is no returning to normal. A lot of people, have, it'll return to normal soon. When will it return to normal? Lots of conversations about when, how do we get back to normal? Well, that doesn't exist anymore. We live in a pandemic right now that will not just go away. That is something that has changed our lives forever. So there's no going back to pre-pandemic life because that is our life now. So we must reimagine the shape of our future. We can use the experiences and the data that we have to make predictions of our future, but only our actions that we take are going to determine the outcome. I think in order to really jump into this conversation, we do need to do a little review of the market impact on workforce demand. So if we go through a quick timeline of COVID and how that relates to supply and demand, we started off in March with the World Health Organization declaring that the coronavirus is a pandemic. So that immediately led to an overwhelming understanding of flatten the curve, taking protective measures that were introduced. So the entire world has been rallied around safety guidelines, and these have substantially impacted businesses and caused regional shutdowns, right? So we have our situation, and then we have, the impact that took. When you shut something down so suddenly, there is going to be a result of that. And unfortunately, the last week of March, we saw 6.6 million people in the US file for unemployment. And then we move into April with tremendous uncertainty and shock of what has happened. Unfortunately, in April, we continued to lose jobs, and 20.7 million jobs were lost in April. Additional guidelines were provided to states on how and when they can reopen, and states began releasing plans to reopen. So that started to take place in April, and I do believe Georgia was the first state to open in that last week of April, where Emily's there. And then in May, the CDC releases guidelines that are by specific business type. So that then opened up a whole new area for businesses to begin reopening and to be able to understand. They started to begin to have some certainty of what they needed to do for their specific business to begin to reopen so they could take action against that. So states began to reopen by country, city, region, and they're continuing to do so. But the good news is, yes, we continued to lose jobs in May, but 2.5 million jobs were added back in May. So that's a really positive outcome that we're seeing as markets reopen. So now we're starting June with an unemployment rate of 14.7. Widespread reopenings by region and industry, and new unemployment filings begin to show weekly decline. So I think it's important to talk about those specific things because consumer demand drives workforce demand. And when we look over here at the chart on the left, we can see that we added 22 million jobs since the last recession in 2010. In 10 years, we added 22 million. And in a matter of weeks, we lost 22 million. But jobs started to come back in May, with 2.5 being added. So we're seeing a return for the demand of workforce, and that is because markets are reopening, businesses are reopening, there is a consumer demand for products and services, and therefore there is a workforce demand. Those two things are tremendously dependent upon each other. The first amazing way that we saw our entire workforce categorized was people divided by a line of whether their work was essential or non-essential. And essential workers were supplying services and goods that were critical to consumer need. And then things that were not feeling consumer need in a time of social distance and shelter in place, those things significantly felt the decline. There was not a demand for those services, as there were not people consuming those products and services. So we saw an increase, of course, in grocery, delivery services, healthcare, warehouse, and we saw decreases in retail, apparel, fashion, travel, automotive, aerospace. People aren't traveling, so they're not using gas. So these things were amazing to see how entire workforces were separated by whether they were critical or non-essential. But each market is impacted differently because of the social order that is in place, and how each market is affected differently is impacting its recovery. This is also true by industry. Because of how industries are fueled by consumer demand, their recovery is also going to be dependent on that consumer demand as well. So varying results by location and varying results by industry. But what drives that are similarities between business recovery and recruitment recovery, how these things are interdependent. Now, for business recovery, number one, foremost that's important is health and safety, and how that business is required to take measures and adaptability based on the contact of that business. Social order. This varies by location, but social order is what is driving the supply and demand. Can you even do business based on what is being required? Consumer behavior, right? So how does the consumer behave now? And supply chains. There's long tail effects of things that impact businesses, that impact their supply chains, of their ability to access in the materials and services needed for them to deliver. Now, if we bring that over onto the recruitment recovery side, right, we're dependent on those things of business in order to have a need to recruit. And that is going to vary based on location, based on the industry and vertical, the sector of the type of business that you're recruiting for. And then the profession, right? The skills and role types that you're hiring for, whether or not there's a demand for those specific roles. And then the talent market itself, the demand for talent, and capacity, your ability to recruit and hire talent. So those things will make an impact on business recovery and recruitment recovery. Recruitment and talent acquisition in some organizations is viewed as a cost center. This is always a challenge that we faced in talent acquisition. And when businesses are squeezed, they look for places to save money, to cut costs. And businesses can very quickly come to a high level assumption of, well, we're not hiring right now, so let's just cut our budget on talent. Each business needs to make its own decision based on its predictions of recovery and its need to manage its cash flow. It's really an a defensive move that companies need to take to survive through the times. But what it's done to TA is made increased expectation of ROI with limited resources. In some cases, resources have been cut, budgets have been cut. They're being asked to be more efficient with all of these things. So we're being asked in talent acquisition to do more with less. On the other side of this is there's, as a result of COVID, an increased need for highly accelerated change. We've had to adapt because of all the changes that are happening to the recruitment process. All of those things, social order, safety concerns, they are part of the recruitment process now. So talent acquisition teams have to adapt, and that's anticipate what isn't changing, plan for change, and do it quickly. And do it with less budget and less resources, and be more efficient with your process. So the top three things that we got out of a survey that we recently did were that companies are being asked for, what companies need is more efficiency, more technology, and more resources. So that is what people are feeling, and that certainly makes sense based on the demands of talent acquisition teams today. So from our survey, we had asked, has your process been impacted by COVID-19? And almost 82% of over 100 companies' response showed that almost 82% are feeling that impact in their process. So Recruitics, we're innovators. We got together and did a think tank exercise, thinking on the situation, how to anticipate the challenges ahead for talent acquisition teams, the processes, and the strategies. So we took on the task and brought together teams of experienced recruitment marketers. We gathered virtually to discuss and collaborate and brainstorm. Now, the action from that was that each team presented to the other a review of research, data, trends, ideas, and conversations that were taking place with companies to understand what are the pains that people are feeling, what can we understand based on everything that we're seeing, reading, researching. And what that really did was brought together a collective focused around a singular purpose, and that was to reimagine, anticipate what needs to happen. There was a long list that came out of that meeting, but as we started to move things around and organize them, the results that came out of that is we really determined that there were 4 consistent high-level themes of areas where talent acquisition has been most significantly impacted. Now, I could talk to you all day about every little thing that has been impacted, but these ones we recognize as having some of the most significant impact. So we're happy to share these with you today. The critical areas that have been impacted are the talent market has shifted significantly. Virtual hiring is necessary. Workforces have become essential remote. Employer brand experience in messaging is crisis critical. So we'd love to talk to you about each of these in more detail.